Hey everybody! Today we're going to do a lesson that involves labeling the lunar phase diagrams. So I need everybody to go to Schoology to the week of January 11th and open up in that folder the lesson that's literally titled Labeling Lunar Phase Diagrams. Okay? And you're going to want to open it with Cami, like so. Okay? So I have a few diagrams in here. The first couple we're actually going to label. So the phases are blank, but the one on the top, the first page, the sun is on the left, and the next page, the sun is on the right. And then later on, they're actually labeled and done for you. The third page, the sun's on the top. And same thing with the last one, but it's also showing Earth moving a little bit in its orbit as the moon revolves around the Earth. So the final one is probably the most accurate in terms of what's really going on in space. Because it's not just the moon that's moving, Earth is also moving in its orbit in that same period of time. So let's look at the first one. The sun is on the left. So what this diagram is showing is the 8 different positions as the moon orbits around the Earth. And each position will represent a specific shape or phase that we see here on Earth. All right. Now, you always would like to start with either the new moon or full moon. The way I teach it is you start with the new moon. Now, the new moon isn't always going to be numbered number 1. In this case, it is. So the way you always want to try to observe the new moon in one of these diagrams is find when the moon is in the middle. So what I mean by middle is in between the sun and the Earth. So here, position 1, sun, moon, Earth. So right there, when it's aligned like that, someone on Earth, if they were to look up at the moon, would only be seeing this dark side of the moon, which means they're going to see no moon. And if you remember from the other lesson, no moon means new moon. So the entire circle here, I want you to shade in. So please follow along what I'm doing on your copy in Cami. Okay, so you're going to shade in that whole circle. And then you're going to title that New Moon. You may want to use text box if it doesn't come out as neat. You can also zoom in and make it a better image and then zoom out, all right, which will help with the other pictures. All right, now the moon's going to start to move in its orbit. So after a few days, the moon is going to move to here. Now, no matter what side I put the sun, what always stays the same is the direction the moon orbits. And it will always orbit in a counterclockwise direction. When in doubt, almost everything goes counterclockwise. Okay, the moon goes around the Earth counterclockwise, the Earth goes around the sun counterclockwise, and the Earth also rotates from above the North Pole counterclockwise. So if you're not sure, more likely than not, if you go with counterclockwise as a guess, you're likely going to be correct. All right. So now the moon is going to move to position 2. So now this observer on Earth, if they look up at position 2, they can only see the half of the moon that's facing Earth. So most of this lit portion of the moon that I'm shading in here with these little blinds is not going to be visible. So they're only going to see this really tiny sliver here. Okay? And if the person is standing on Earth looking up this way, that light is actually going to be on their right. So what they're going to see is a very small moon, but it's going to be lit on the right. So what you're going to do is what we see, you're going to leave blank on these drawings and shade in the portion that is not visible. And that's because since the moon appears white and since paper is white and the brighter portion of these images is white, what we see you're going to leave blank. So if it's a full moon, you're going to leave the entire thing blank. Well, this isn't a full moon. This is seeing a very tiny sliver. We call that sliver the crescent. Remember the other day I said it's like the croissant? And since it's the right side that's visible, we're going to call it the waxing crescent. Okay? And you can see, you can zoom out. And it's the better way to do the drawing, probably. Zoom in, make your drawing, zoom out, and you can see it. All right. Next, it's going to move to position 3. When it moves to position 3, well, it started at 1, so it made a quarter turn around the Earth. So we call this our first quarter. Okay, our first quarter. Now, for an observer on Earth looking at the moon, they're going to see the half of the moon facing them. So they're not going to see this portion of the lit half. But they're still going to see half of the lighted side. So they're seeing half of a half, which is another reason why we call it a quarter moon, because you're really seeing 25% of the moon. But just be careful, okay? Because I understand it's going to make sense to say half moon, but when you see a half moon, we call it a quarter moon. All right? So you're going to shade in the left half, only making the right half visible. Okay? All right. Next, it's going to move to position 4. Still going counterclockwise. So now the observer is going to look up. They're going to see most of the lit half, except for this little portion. So now they're seeing almost the entire lit half. So the moon's going to appear very big, but it's going to look like it's missing a little bit. Okay, so it's going to look like this. And we call this, the right is still lit. So whenever the right is lit, we call that waxing. And this shape means humpback or hunched back. Gibbous. Gibbous. So that is a term that's probably not usually in your vocabulary. So it's a crescent. You should know the name of that shape. But gibbous, you probably never heard of before. So the phase that looks like it's almost full, just missing a little bit, we call it the gibbous phase. If the right is lit, we call it the waxing gibbous. All right. Then it moves to position 5. And for position 5, the entire lit half is facing Earth, which means we see the entire lit side of the moon. So the moon is a full moon. So we do nothing for the picture. We leave it blank, signifying that we see the whole circle. Full moon. All right. Once it passes full, it begins to shrink. Instead of saying a shrinking moon, we refer to that as a waning moon. So now, when the moon has moved to position 6, most of the lit half is facing the Earth, except for this little portion here. And now it's easier to see that the light is on the left, and this little darkness here, right here, this darkness is on the right. So now it looks like the moon is missing a little bit on the right. So it's almost full, just missing a little piece. And that piece is missing on the right. So the left is lit. And if the left is lit, we say waning. And that means, shrinking. So waxing is growing, waning is shrinking, but it's the same name for the shape. So this is called the gibbous again. Gibbous. Waning gibbous. All right. Then it moves to position 7. And when it gets to 7, we see half of the lit side of the moon. And the far side here is not visible. So once again, we're seeing half of a half. So this is called a quarter, right? But if you're looking up this time, now it's really clear that the light that we see is on the left and the darkness is on the right. So this one is the easiest to draw when it's on the top because it's exactly what you're seeing in the diagram. So the left half is what we see. The right half is in darkness. Okay? And we call this either the last quarter or the third quarter. Last or third quarter. Okay? And then it's going to move to position 8, which is the very final phase. And in that final phase, when the observer on Earth looks up, now we don't see most of the lit half. We're only seeing this tiny slice. And that slice is on our left. So that means the left is going to be visible, but we're going to be missing most of the right. So once again, since the left is visible, we call that waning. And that's the same shape, though. This is still called, and make a great drawing, but it's still called a crescent. Okay? And those are our 8 phases. And after the waning crescent, it disappears entirely, and the moon is reborn, born anew. Okay? And it takes 29 and a half days to go through all phases. 29 and a half days. Okay? And the motion that causes it, write this down in the text. Lunar, let me make that a little bigger. Lunar revolution causes the lunar phases. Okay? So lunar revolution, which means the moon orbiting the Earth. So if you want to add that in, lunar revolution, that means moon orbiting the Earth causes the lunar phases. Okay? So if the moon never went around Earth, then the moon will be stuck in the same phase forever. Okay, but since the moon goes around Earth and it takes about a month, we go through a complete cycle every month. All right, so what I want you to do now for the remaining time is I want you to try it on your own. So this time I put the sun on the right, okay, and I want you to draw in the phases starting with number 1. Okay, draw in and label every 8. Okay, and then we'll go over. All right, have a great day. See you soon.